What if I told you that the moment you cut contact with a narcissistic parent, you don't just disappear from their life, you trigger something far more devastating than simple abandonment. The truth about what really happens when you go no contact isn't just about missing family dinners or awkward holidays. It's about unleashing a psychological storm that exposes the darkest truths about control, manipulation, and the twisted foundation your entire relationship was built on. Most people think going no contact is about protecting yourself, and they're right. But what they don't tell you is that your absence becomes a mirror that forces everyone involved to confront realities they've spent years desperately avoiding. When you step away from a narcissistic parent, you're not just removing yourself, you're removing their primary source of emotional supply, their favorite target for projection, and most importantly, their sense of control over the narrative of who you are. Here's where things get disturbing. The moment you disappear, your narcissistic parent doesn't just feel sad or rejected. They feel something far more primal and terrifying: complete loss of control. You see, narcissistic parents don't love you the way healthy parents do. They need you. They need you to validate their version of reality, to absorb their emotional chaos, and to serve as a constant reminder that they have power over someone. When you remove yourself, you're not just taking away their child, you're taking away their emotional drug. But that wasn't the whole story. The psychological impact goes deeper than anyone expects, and it affects both sides in ways that will shock you. Your narcissistic parent enters what experts call narcissistic injury, a state where their carefully constructed self-image begins to crumble. They built their identity around being the parent, the one in control, the center of your universe. Your absence doesn't just hurt them, it threatens their entire sense of self. The first stage is always denial. They convince themselves this is temporary, that you're just having a phase, that you'll come crawling back when you realize how much you need them. This isn't grief, it's desperation. They can't accept that you've seen through their manipulation, because accepting that would mean confronting the possibility that they were never the loving parent they believed themselves to be. The cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable. What happens next is truly disturbing. Your narcissistic parent begins what psychologists call narrative reconstruction. Since they can't handle the reality that you left because of their behavior, they start rewriting history. Suddenly, you become the ungrateful child, the one with problems, the one who is always difficult. They tell anyone who will listen that you're mentally unstable, that you've been influenced by others, that you're going through some kind of breakdown. This isn't just gossip, it's psychological survival. By making you the villain, they protect their fragile ego from the devastating truth. But here's what really happens in those quiet moments when no one else is around. Your narcissistic parent experiences something they've probably never felt before: true powerlessness. For years, they controlled your emotions, your reactions, your very sense of reality. They could make you angry, sad, guilty, or ashamed with just a few carefully chosen words. Now, silence. Their manipulation tactics hit dead air. Their emotional manipulation has no target. They're screaming into the void, and the void isn't screaming back. The psychological terror of this realization can't be overstated. Narcissistic parents are addicted to emotional supply. The reactions, the drama, the power dynamics. When you go no contact, you're essentially cutting off their drug supply, cold turkey. They experience what experts call narcissistic withdrawal, and it's every bit as devastating as any other addiction withdrawal. They become desperate, erratic, and increasingly unstable as they search for new sources of supply or ways to force you back into contact. Meanwhile, something equally profound is happening to you. The silence that terrifies them becomes your sanctuary, but it also becomes your battlefield. Without their constant voice in your head telling you who you are, what you think, and how you should feel, you're forced to confront a terrifying question. Who are you when you're not defined by their expectations, their criticism, or their manipulation? This identity crisis isn't optional, it's inevitable. For years, your sense of self was shaped by their projections. You might have been the scapegoat, the golden child, or the invisible one, but regardless of your role, your identity was defined in relation to them. Now that you've removed yourself from their sphere of influence, you have to rebuild your entire sense of self from scratch. And that process, it's both liberating and absolutely terrifying. The most shocking part is that your narcissistic parent knows, on some level, that your absence is forcing this growth. They know that every day you don't contact them, you're getting stronger, more independent, and less likely to ever return to their web of control. This knowledge drives them to increasingly desperate measures, but what they do next will shock you even more than what we've already uncovered. The desperation that follows your silence isn't just pathetic, it's downright terrifying. When a narcissistic parent realizes that their usual manipulation tactics aren't working, that their emotional blackmail is falling on deaf ears, they don't just give up and move on, they escalate. And what they do next reveals just how deep their need for control really runs. This is where things get absolutely insane. Your narcissistic parent begins what experts call hoovering, named after the vacuum cleaner because they're trying to suck you back into their toxic orbit. But this isn't your typical "I miss you" phone call. This is psychological warfare disguised as love. They'll send messages that swing wildly between extreme guilt trips and sudden declarations of change. One day it's "I'm dying and you don't even care." The next it's "I've been going to therapy and I finally understand everything." Don't be fooled. This isn't genuine remorse. This is manipulation at its most calculated and cruel. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. When direct contact fails, they deploy what psychologists call flying monkeys. Other family members, friends, or acquaintances who become unwitting weapons in their campaign to break your no-contact boundary. Your aunt suddenly calls with urgent family news that could have waited months. Your sibling starts asking probing questions about why you're being so dramatic. These people aren't necessarily malicious, they're being manipulated just like you were, fed carefully crafted stories designed to make you look like the unreasonable one. The flying monkeys serve a dual purpose that's absolutely chilling. First, they gather intelligence about your life, your emotional state, your vulnerabilities. Every piece of information gets reported back to your narcissistic parent, who uses it to craft even more targeted manipulation attempts. Second, they apply social pressure, making you feel isolated, guilty, and like you're the one causing all this family drama. It's gaslighting by proxy, and it's devastatingly effective. Meanwhile, you're fighting a war on two fronts that nobody prepared you for. On one side, you're dealing with the external pressure, the messages, the flying monkeys, the social media stalking, the accidental run-ins that feel anything but accidental. On the other side, you're battling something even more insidious, the voice in your head that sounds exactly like your narcissistic parent, questioning every decision you make. This internal battle is where the real psychological horror unfolds. Years of conditioning don't just disappear because you've blocked their number. Their voice is embedded in your psyche, criticizing your choices, making you doubt your perceptions, flooding you with guilt every time you feel a moment of peace. You catch yourself thinking their thoughts, feeling guilty for things that aren't even your fault, wondering if maybe you really are the problem. This is trauma bonding at its most cruel. They've programmed you to torture yourself even when they're not around. But that wasn't even the most shocking discovery. The longer you maintain no contact, the more you start to see how your entire family system was built around accommodating your narcissistic parents' dysfunction. Every family gathering, every holiday tradition, every relationship dynamic was carefully orchestrated to keep them at the center, happy and in control. Your absence doesn't just affect them, it destabilizes the entire family structure. Other family members who seem supportive suddenly turn cold, not because they don't love you, but because your refusal to play your assigned role forces everyone else to confront uncomfortable truths about the family they've been enabling. Your siblings might have to become the new scapegoat. Your other parent might finally have to face the reality of their spouse's behavior without you there to deflect attention. The extended family starts choosing sides, and guess what? They usually choose the path of least resistance, which means maintaining the status quo and pressuring you to come back. This is when you realize the most devastating truth of all. You weren't just your narcissistic parent's victim, you were the entire family's emotional shock absorber. Everyone benefited from your suffering because it meant they didn't have to deal with the narcissist's full wrath. Your role wasn't just child, it was family sacrifice, the one who took the hits so everyone else could maintain the illusion of a functional family. The psychological impact of this realization can't be understated. You're not just grieving the loss of your parent, you're grieving the loss of your entire concept of family love and belonging. Everything you thought you knew about your relationships, your worth, and your place in the world gets turned upside down. The people you thought would support you turn away, and you're left wondering if you ever truly mattered to anyone, or if you were just a convenient target for everyone's dysfunction. But here's what your narcissistic parent never counted on. Every day you survive without their chaos, every boundary you maintain despite the pressure, every moment of peace you find in the silence. It's proof that their version of reality was nothing but lies. And what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about healing family and your own strength. Here's the part that will absolutely blow your mind. As months turn into years of no contact, something incredible starts happening that your narcissistic parent never saw coming. You begin to remember who you actually are underneath all their conditioning, manipulation, and projection. And that person? They're nothing like the broken, worthless, problematic child your narcissistic parent convinced everyone you were. The healing process isn't pretty. It's messy, painful, and full of setbacks that would break most people. But here's what's truly shocking. Every breakthrough you experience sends ripple effects back to your narcissistic parent in ways you never expected. They start hearing through the family grapevine that you're thriving, that you're in therapy, that you're building healthy relationships, that you're successful in ways they never thought possible. And this news, it destroys them more than your initial absence ever could. This is where the narcissistic injury reaches its peak. Devastation. Your success without them proves everything they told you about yourself was a lie. Every time they called you worthless, ungrateful, or incapable, it was projection of their own deepest fears about themselves. Your healing journey becomes undeniable evidence that the problem was never you. It was always them, and deep down, in the parts of themselves they've spent decades trying to hide, they know it. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. The real revelation comes when you realize that your narcissistic parents' entire identity was built on your failure. They needed you to be broken, dependent, and struggling because your success would expose their lies, not just to you, but to everyone around them. Your thriving without their guidance and love proves that their parenting wasn't protective, it was destructive. Their concern wasn't care, it was control. Meanwhile, something even more profound is happening to your brain. Years of hypervigilance, walking on eggshells, and constantly managing their emotions had rewired your nervous system for survival, not living. But in the safety of no contact, your brain starts to heal in ways that feel almost miraculous. You stop flinching at raised voices. You stop overanalyzing every word in text messages. You stop feeling guilty for having basic human needs and boundaries. The most incredible part? You start to understand what healthy relationships actually look like. When people respect your no the first time you say it, when they don't punish you with silent treatment for having different opinions, when they support your success instead of undermining it. These experiences feel so foreign that they're almost overwhelming. You realize you've been living in emotional poverty your entire life, accepting crumbs and calling it love. Your narcissistic parent, meanwhile, is experiencing their own psychological reckoning. As your absence stretches longer, their flying monkeys start getting tired of being deployed. Other family members begin questioning why this whole situation requires so much drama and manipulation. Some might even start setting their own boundaries, inspired by your courage to break free. The family system that was built around accommodating one person's dysfunction starts to crack, and suddenly your narcissistic parent finds themselves more isolated than they ever imagined possible. This isolation forces them into a space they've spent their entire life avoiding. Genuine self-reflection, without you to blame, project onto, or use as their emotional dumping ground. They're left alone with their own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. For some narcissists, this leads to even more desperate and erratic attempts to regain control. For others, it leads to a complete breakdown, as their carefully constructed false self crumbles under the weight of reality. But here's the most shocking truth of all. Your decision to go no contact doesn't just heal you, it has the potential to break an entire generational cycle of dysfunction. Every boundary you maintain, every time you choose your peace over their chaos, every moment you refuse to pass their trauma down to the next generation, you're not just saving yourself, you're saving your future children, your future relationships, and potentially your entire family line from repeating these same toxic patterns. The final revelation that will leave you speechless? Your narcissistic parents' worst nightmare wasn't losing you, it was the possibility that you'd become everything they pretended to be. Genuinely loving, truly empathetic, authentically confident, and emotionally healthy. Your healing journey proves that all the qualities they claim to have while treating you terribly were actually qualities you possessed all along, buried under years of their manipulation and abuse. Going no contact with a narcissistic parent isn't just about cutting off a toxic relationship. It's about reclaiming your entire identity, your future, and your right to exist without constantly managing someone else's emotional dysfunction. It's about choosing to love yourself enough to break free from people who never learned how to love anyone, including themselves. The silence that once terrified you becomes the space where you finally learn to hear your own voice. And that voice, it's been waiting your entire life to tell you the truth. They never wanted you to hear. You were never the problem. You were always worth saving, and the person strong enough to walk away, that's who you really are.